ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures.
Well, welcome to Deep Dive Movie Reviews with my friend Steve Hackman and myself, James Marsh. This week, we are looking at Park Chan-wook's Decision to Leave.
Hey, but before we begin, if you haven't already subscribed to Deep Dive Movie Reviews, it'd be a great favor to us if you went ahead and just hit that subscribe button. And while you're there, hit the little bell next to it. And that way you'll be reminded every single time we release a new review. And just as a reminder, Deep Dive Movie Reviews does contain a whole bunch of spoilers. So you've been warned. James?
Okay, so Decision to Leave, new movie, highly anticipated film from Park Chan-wook. It's the story of a cop played by Park Hae-il, who is stuck in a stagnant, loveless marriage that isn't really going anywhere. And he is investigating the death of a wealthy intellectual or academic, I think he is, who has fallen off the mountain that he likes to go solo climbing up and down as his his quiet time, his little place of peace, if you like. Immediately, his young Chinese wife, played by Tang is brought in to identify the body as much as anything else. And then we quickly discover that she is the victim of domestic abuse and becomes prime suspect. There isn't really any evidence, but things don't really add up. And so Hae-jin, the cop, starts to surveil her. He suffers from insomnia anyway, so he spends his nights following her around, sitting outside her apartment in his car and just watching her. And inevitably, he becomes attracted to her. Mm-hmm. And then the film changes from a police procedural into something far more like a sort of sumptuous, almost gothic romance. Now, to go into any more sort of detail of the plot, we will piece by piece, I'm sure, and pick out bits that we like. But that's the basic setup, and I think that sort of leads us down the path. So, Steve, what did you make of Decision to Leave?
I've got so many thoughts on this film, James. Immediately I could see how Park Chan-wook got Best Director at Cannes for this, because the stylization of this film, I felt like each scene was like a painting, beautifully set up. The cinematography. I was mentioning off camera, I was jealous that you've seen it now a second time, because you need to see this film a second time. There is just so much eye candy. There's so many details. There are so many things that are going on in each scene that I still suspect that I've missed a fair bit in this film, and I need to go back and see it again. But my initial thought is this is just a canvas of beautiful colors and imagery. It's just a wonderful palette he's created. There's just it's eye candy, and I'm looking forward to going and seeing it again, because I know that there's things that I've missed along the way.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many sort of details. This is a real sort of virtuoso performance, I felt, from the director. There are sort of visual motifs and details. There's camera trickery throughout it. There are oral sort of ticks and moments where there's a moment early on where he's like following her in his car, and he's listening to sort of classical music on the radio, and then the tick tock of his indicator kind of falls in line with the music and then falls in line with hers. And so the tick tock of both of their cars, of both the indicators of the car, kind of fall into that. And it's almost as if they're kind of dancing or something like that, just for that briefest of moment. And it happens early on. It's kind of the first suggestion that, that there is something sort of between them.
Right.
The way Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, and what I've been thinking about this movie since I've seen it a couple days ago. And what I'm seeing now, like when you mentioned in the setup about him being in a loveless marriage, the reason he's in a loveless marriage is because he is the classic cop that lives for the unsolved case. And the reason I feel that he becomes absolutely infatuated with Tang Wei's character is because she is a walking unsolved case. She personifies what he is always desiring in his heart's desire is to solve the unsolved cases. You know, he's got the photo wall of all the unsolved cases. It's something that it drives him. This is something that comes between him and his wife, because he really loves this. And she, the Tang Wei, the Chinese immigrant wife, not his wife, but the suspect.
Yeah.
She personifies, this was my interpretation. She personifies this wall for him. Of course he's going to fall in love with her. She is a walking identification, a walking reality of what is his life's passion.
Yeah, I mean, she walks into his life and she is a riddle.
Yes.
You know, she's a foreigner. She speaks a different language. Her Korean is very good, but it's not perfect. There's these conversations between him and his partner, his cop partner, about, oh, you got to talk to her in like simplified language, use easy words, you know, in order to discuss sort of the elements of the case. And then on the one hand, that works sometimes, but then she will come out with incredibly sort of elaborate and precise ways of saying things that sort of put everybody on the back foot. As they dig into her past, they discover all kinds of crazy stuff. You know, that she is wanted for murder.
Yes.
In China, she euthanized her mother. With her consent. She asked her to do it, but she did it, and then she was kind of smuggled into Korea. She was on a boat or whatever, and her grandfather was a Korean war hero from the other side, I think, of the war. And her husband, the murder victim, or the victim that they're investigating as a murder, he kind of helped her get her immigration status, and that's kind of what he does. But then he was kind of being blackmailed for that. There's so much going on.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right that they take these photographs of her and her bruises and what have you, and her husband, who had everything monogrammed, even has her monogrammed. There is a tattoo on her belly of his initials, and you realize that he was actually kind of a nasty piece of work.
Yes. Yeah.
And the more that he that Hae-il, the cop, finds out about all of this, you know, it's like the greatest K-drama ever. It's interesting that the characters are all watching like these soaps, these K-dramas.
Yes.
And you find out that Hae-il's wife actually works at a power plant down in Ipoh, and that's why they kind of live separately, because he works in Busan and she lives in Ipoh, and so he commutes through the fog late at night on the weekends to kind of see her, and that's why one of the big reasons why their marriage is kind of falling apart. And in the second half of the film, it's revealed that So-rae moves to Ipoh for reasons we will get into, and they say it's because she's a fan of this soap opera that took place at a power station. And then it turns out the wife isn't happy about that because it promotes this false image of the power station, and actually there's very serious work going on there, and all of these kind of like little details that just add to this kind of over dramatized image of this woman whose life is a walking K-drama kind of thing.
Yeah. It's there's so much drama, like you said. Every time you think you figured out So-rae, there's another element, like you said, of her past or some. And I think that's one of the reasons that Hae-il is so infatuated with her. She's just this cornucopia of drama and enigmas and riddles, and you can just see where he cannot resist her. He's almost a little creepy, you know. There's a lot of voyeurism going on, a lot of things that she's not aware of, that he's keeping track of her. So it's borderline a little bit creepy, but I guess he's a cop, so it's okay, right? And she's a suspect.
Sure, it's a cop. He's allowed to do whatever he wants. But no, I love how the film crosses those boundaries and crosses those lines, where he'll be sitting in his car watching her through his window, and then suddenly he's sitting beside her on the sofa, and that, you know, and it's always doing that, and the eye lines between where they're looking at each other, but they'll be cut together from different scenes in different spaces, but they're still kind of looking at each other, realize that they're really getting into each other's heads, and that both of them are just becoming sort of increasingly more sort of infatuated with each other. You know, they discover that the Seo-rae works as a caregiver. You know, she goes around the old people's home looking after the nurses, and they are looking after the old ladies, and they all love her. You know, she's the daughter that they never had. But there's slight anomalies, like she's got really rough skin on her hands, you know, and not like the Korean women who will all have beautiful sort of soft skin. Then there's a whole thing with a mobile phone where one of the old ladies has the same mobile phone that she does, and you realize that there's been a switch at some point and for some reason and something. And
that's what I want to almost say. There's details that I don't know if they actually meant anything or if I've missed something, but I'm almost looking for people to help me explain a few things too, because we're talking about, you know, just throw the phone in the river, and I'm thinking she's had at least 3 phones, and I was getting confused at one point about what, you know, the phones and you know, just little things like that left me going, am I missing something? Am I dumb? Because is there dots I'm not connecting here, or is this just added details that the director's put in just as part of his palette?
The phone becomes incredibly important because she works for an agency where she's sent out to check with to look after old ladies, and on the day that she, spoilers, murders her husband, she has to sneak out from the back door of that old people's home, otherwise the old lady will see that she's gone out. But she swaps phones with her. They have the same phone, and I think that was a plan, because they said they went out one day and they bought phones together, and so I think that was so she swaps phones because her boss will call her on the client's phone to check that she's there. And so she's not going to be there. She's going to be halfway up a mountain by then. So she needs to have the old lady's phone rather than her own phone, so that she can take the call and be like, yeah, I'm here, I'm at work, I'm okay. But what Hae-il finds on the phone is there's an app, like an altitude app, as to how many, like, or a step app, right? So that you know how many floors you've been up and down. And he notices on the old lady's phone that she's obviously 00000 every day, because she hasn't left her house in 10 years, except on one day, and it's the day of the accident or the murder or whatever, where it's up 138 floors or whatever. And so he's like, well, hang on a minute. And then obviously when he goes later and he checks, that mountain is exactly 138 stories high. So for somehow this phone, the old lady's phone, has gone up and down that mountain and then come back to beside her. So clearly she swapped the phones, but then the reason is, why did she swap the phone? She swapped the phone because her boss was going to call her to make sure that she was at work, so she had an alibi, and the alibi is that she's at work, when in fact she snuck out the door and she was up a mountain all day.
Well, thank you. That was good. That filled in the blank for me. Really good.
Okay.
I did like how the trope that the director uses to enact these different scenes out, where they're piecing like the whole murder scene, when he's going up and he's visualizing how she would have done it and how it all came about, but it's all happening in his mind. But we the audience are getting to see it played out. For real. And so, and they use that trope a few times during the course of the film, where we get to see the certain actions being played out, but it's all happening in the person's head. different scenes kind of intercut, but we're not sure if what we're seeing is real, if we're seeing the truth, if we're seeing that person's perception of it,
their imagination, or how they hypothesize what might have happened. And that sequence is particularly strong, where he's climbing up, which is crazy that anybody would climb up that mountain, you know, without years and years of experience. But you've got 3 different characters doing it, you know? Or the scene at the beginning, when on the day that they first go to the scene of the crime, they have to go up, and so he's going up using this special kind of winch machine with his partner strapped to his back. There's so much kind of like dark humor, you know, gallows humor in this movie. It's surprisingly funny, considering what it's about and the style that a lot of it is told in, which is like this really rich, sort of dark, melancholic. That's why I said it's almost like a gothic romance or something. So much of it is told is steeped in emotion. And there's just really funny stuff. Like, I found all of the subordinates, all of the cop subordinates in both in both police stations, because we have to acknowledge that about an hour and a half into the movie, the last third of the movie takes place like a year later.
Yes.
Where he's moved to Ipoh. You know, she has gone off. He's let her go, kind of thing. And then she shows up in Ipoh with a new husband, and
she shows up with her second husband, and lo and behold, he dies. And like, go figure. You know, this woman is a Black Widow.
Well, this is it, and this is what really annoys him, because there's that whole scene at the sort of the end of the first half, if you like, where he says to her, "Take this phone, throw it in the ocean." You know, the phone that essentially proves that she went up the mountain on that day. And at the end of the film, she reveals that she interpreted that as, "That's the moment when you told me you loved me."
Yeah.
You never said I love you, but that moment when you gave me back my phone, you said, "Take this phone, throw it in the ocean as deep as you can." And she doesn't. She keeps it.
She keeps the phone.
So it shows it later. But she was like, "That's the moment when you told me you loved me, and that your love for me died, but then when my love for you was born on that same day." You know, which she tells him in the very tragic ending of the story.
Oh yes,
yeah, which we'll get to in just a minute. But I did want to highlight some of the really sort of funny moments. There's like as I was saying, the subordinates in the cops are like really funny. You know, there's a lot of sort of just funny kind of little physical interplay between them, where they're just kind of shrugging and kind of going, There's a running joke about what food they're allowed to buy on their expenses,
on their budgets. Budget. And he finds out that he bought her, the suspect, this high-end sushi meal, and they're all having. Wait, isn't that the this? And
he's like, "Is that covered?" And he's like, and she's like, And I loved all that kind of interplay. And then his partner, like the kind of stocky woman with the bowl cut at the second place. She's great. She had a real
comical look. Like you just wouldn't want to cross her. Like she would mess you up bad.
Absolutely. And I felt that there's a lot of it is actually kind of played for laughs, and a lot of it is in the there's a heightened sense of not realism, but almost kind of like hyper realism to the way, and it's a lot to do with the camera work and a lot to do with the editing. There's a whole sequence where it uses the same trick from Ant-Man, where somebody's telling the story, but you see another character tell the story, although with his audio dubbed over it as well. And there's little bits like that where you're like, this is how you make a comedy, but these bits aren't funny, you know. And so it was a lot of sort of weird subversion of sort of genre tropes in that regard. You know, I mean, this is a police procedural, this is a tragic romance, it's a film noir, you know, it is a gothic romance, but it's also really darkly humorous in just the way that the story is told as well. It almost feels wrong somewhat sometimes, you know, but you realize that you're just in the hands of this showboating filmmaker who is just like doing wheelies around you for no reason whatsoever. You're just
that's what I'm left. There's so many elements, like even the eye drops. The eye drops is a constant fixture in this film. You know, the cop is constantly stopping, putting his eye drops in, and I'm asking myself, what is the director trying to convey here? There's this tick that this guy has that is obviously part of his makeup, and because he doesn't just put in eye drops once or twice. I bet you he puts in eye drops at least a dozen times in this film.
Yeah, on camera it happens a lot. And I was kind of thinking, and it also seems to cut to the eyeballs of the dead body with the ants,
fly,
with the ants or whatever crawling over it. So I was trying to think, what does it mean? You know, is this about he's unreliable, he can't see what's right in front of him, or something like that? I think it's obviously trying to tell us something, and I think it's something about his perception of events, or just that his vision is being clouded by his romantic feelings for her.
Absolutely.
Like that is blatantly obvious to everybody that she's responsible for this, except for him, whose judgment is completely clouded.
And both of her husbands, I mean, even though she's a bit of a Black Widow, we're led to believe that both of the husbands were bad apples, you know.
Absolutely.
One was threatening to send her back to China to her murder. Obviously, she can't go back to China because she's wanted for murder there. We're left with a sympathetic attitude towards her, despite the fact she seems to keep falling into marriages with really bad guys that she ends up having to kill, which is a little weird.
Well, yeah, although did she kill the second guy? I don't think she killed the second guy. Didn't what was his name? Squeaky or Shouty? Slappy. I think Slappy killed him because but she engineered a situation. Yes. Because Slappy's mother had invested with her husband, who's a TV financial analyst, not analyst, which is one of the weirdest. I would love to know how that joke actually works in Korean. Because the subtitles, you're just like, oh wow, it's a great bit of subtitling, because that joke is just awful, terrible. He makes this pun about the fact that he's an analyst, he's not gay. He's not an analyst. And you're like, what? He's just a terrible person. But he cheated the mother or reinvested the mother's money and lost all the mother's money. Right. But then the wife, So Ray, makes sure that Slappy knows that and knows that he did it. Oh, and then didn't she go to the hospital and she drugs the mother? Yes, with the fentanyl pills. Send, knowing that Slappy would then blame her husband. On the death. So she does murder two people. She murders her first husband, or her mother, her first husband, and then Slappy's mum. Yeah. So knowing that would motivate Slappy to go and kill her second husband. So yeah, there are a lot of twisty turny sort of film noirish machinations going on. I mean, in that regard, it reminded me of something like Chinatown, or even like Basic Instinct, without the sex. Yeah, because you're thrown this prime suspect immediately, and they're just like, no, I'm going to fall in love with them instead of.
Well, and it's interesting you bring up the sex issue in Basic Instinct, because I don't think there's any sex in this film. There is, and this is the kind of if there was if this was an American-made film, there would have been a steamy sex scene at some point in this film. And again, I'm fairly new to Korean movies. Maybe this is not something that they normally do, but what was interesting was how chaste this relationship was for the full 2 hours and 18 minutes.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fascinating you say that, because it's almost set up like you're going to expect this to be kind of like an erotic thriller. I mean, Tang, lest we forget, made her name in the movie Lust Caution with Tony Leung, which is as steamy and erotic as a movie as you're going to ever get out of Chinese mainstream, like non-category 3 Chinese cinema. And actually, Park Chan-wook's last movie was The Handmaiden, which has a lot of steamy sex scenes in it as well. Okay. Park Chan-wook comes from, just to give a little sort of background on him for those who don't know, there was this huge sort of boom in interest in Korean cinema in like at the turn of the millennium. It started in like 99, but then straight into the early 21st century, and he was very much at the forefront of that. It was him and Kim Ji-won and Bong Joon-ho really were like the big three big commercial movies. And Park Chan-wook is most famous for making what's called the Vengeance trilogy, which is a movie called Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, then Old Boy, and then Sympathy for Lady Vengeance. In some places, it's just called Lady Vengeance. And although they're not a trilogy, he made them in quick succession, and they're all about revenge stories. And so they became packaged as sort of the Vengeance trilogy. And Old Boy, in particular, the middle one, just became almost like the flagship for this entire wave of new Korean cinema.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so Park Chan-wook was very much at the forefront of that. But then ever since then, everything he's done has been in a kind of different genre. He did a kind of slightly steamy vampire movie called Thirst, also with Song Kang-ho from Parasite. And then he went to the UK and made a TV show of a John le Carre series with Florence Pugh, which I haven't seen. I keep meaning to watch it, called the Little Drummer Girl. And then he made The Handmaiden, which was period set during the Japanese occupation, incredibly sort of sumptuous, another kind of sort of gothic thriller, has a lot of these sort of gothic sensibilities of it. But at the center of it is this steamy same-sex relationship between two women, Kim Tae-ri and Hong Sang-soo's favorite actress, whose name escapes me for the second. But anyway, so he is no stranger to kind of erotic subject matter. And one felt that, oh, if Park Chan-wook and Tang Wei are getting together to make a kind of movie like this, that's what you were probably anticipating.
Right, right.
And so then it turns out to be, like you say, incredibly chaste, sort of almost like a Japanese teen romance, you know, in as much as there's no physical intimacy. It's all unspoken emotional.
It's all internalized.
It's like Remains of the Day or something, you know. It's like they can't say anything to each other at all.
They're British. They're repressed British.
There is something very British about it a little bit, yeah. And also, I mean, the casting of Park Hae-il as the cop. I mean, he is not your typical leading man at all, either as a cop or as a romantic interest. He's this very kind of unassuming guy.
He's just your everyday man. You know, he's not a hunk. He's not a cool guy. There's no aura of Brad Pitt type coolness around him. He's just your average detective, you know, and he pulls it off brilliantly because he's so unassuming. You see, this guy doesn't have much in his life besides his work, and again, this is what drives him, and obviously what leads him to the end. I mean, the only time there's real, we see him as a monotone throughout this whole film. You know, he never kind of, despite a lot of the craziness that's going on around him, he maintains an even keel. It's only at the end when Sung-rae is committing her final act that you start to see the explosion of emotion and what he really felt for this woman.
Yeah, when he kind of realizes it's too late.
Yeah,
you know, and the ending of this film is so Korean. It's so in keeping with this kind of explosive, nihilistic, self-destructive sense of sort of misplaced emotional outpouring.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of these other movies, like Old Boy, not least. I mean, not to ruin the end of Old Boy in case you haven't seen it, but once the truth comes out, you know, the main character sort of does not the same thing as what Seo Ray does to herself here, but it's comparable. And in one degree it's unnecessary, and it's certainly avoidable, and yet the lead character is compelled to punish themselves or inflict sort of violence upon themselves in this way. And there were a number of Korean movies that came out at that time in the early sort of 2000s. 2003 in particular was like a banner year where like a dozen movies came out that were all awesome. And a number of them just end with just these insane sort of outbursts of just tragedy and death and suicide and murder. And you're just like, I remember when I was watching this the first time, I was like, I literally just thought, oh my god, it's 2003 again.
Wow. Okay.
It was that kind of ending, you know. I mean, because we are doing spoilers. I mean, Seo Ray, after all of this, realizes that she can't go on, and she digs a hole in the sand as the tide is coming in and just sits in it and just lets the whole earth swallow her up, quite literally, as he's literally running around above her looking for her.
Yeah, he's looking for her. He's like running right over the top of her, and he's just going nuts. And that was the tragedy, is she was probably less than 3 feet from him at any given moment, and he couldn't see her. She's buried alive already.
She's drowned and buried and in the ground beneath her. Yeah, and it's just so sort of explosively tragic. You know, it's almost sort of exploitatively tragic. It's such a huge kind of gesture of self-destruction that you're just kind of like, oh wow.
My catalog of Korean films, it pales compared to yours. You know, I'm just being introduced to a lot of Asian cinema outside of Chinese cinema, which I know a bit more. So I don't know the Korean film. I don't know the tropes that they use. You know, I basically have seen Parasite and a couple others now at this point, Broker. And so is this normative? Is this kind of, is this, were you surprised?
I was I was kind of overwhelmed by this sort of sense of nostalgia almost.
Okay, interesting.
Because it felt like we were back to the golden days of
This is the good stuff. This is
of
the
20.
good
I was like,
stuff.
this is what they were doing when I was like first watching Korean movies.
Okay.
I'd recently moved to Hong Kong a couple of years before, and it was like the big thing. It was almost like now again, where it's kind of come full circle. Where like 20 years ago, it was for the first time, it was like, who's making great movies right now? Korea. Look at this movie from last year, this movie from a couple of years ago, and then 2003. Watch any one of these like dozen movies, and they're great. They're so extreme and melodramatic, and everything is just ramped up to 11, and it's just pressure cooker explosion of violence and beauty and romance, but just to such a heightened degree. It's like, imagine if sort of RRR was a romantic drama. It would just be like and so I will definitely recommend some from that time.
RRR is so good. For about 20 minutes, it is a romantic drama.
Well, that's it. RRR is all movies. So yeah, it's definitely in there too. But just the intensity of it all.
Sure.
Is so extreme and was so sort of profound. And this operates on that same level of sort of emotional extremity, and also sort of visual ostentatiousness that I was just kind of like, okay, yeah. This is the Korean cinema that we all know and love.
Okay, good. James, drawing this to a close, what instrument should we be using to grade decision to leave?
Shall we use like a monogrammed broken cell phone or something like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so how out of how many monogram broken cell phones out of 5 are you going to give decision to leave?
Well, yeah, I think it should be no secret that I loved this. This was great. This was all the things that I love about Korean cinema. It was Park Chan-wook, who's arguably the best Korean filmmaker of the last 20 years, firing on all cylinders, just grandstanding. It's so visually complex and beautiful, and the narrative just sweeps you up. And yeah, it's a little bit twisty, turny, and complicated, but watching it a second time really sort of helped iron out any of those little sort of questions I had about why did they do this and what did that mean exactly. And it's all there. It's just so dense, and you're being so blown away by all the imagery that maybe it does take a couple of viewings to really absorb everything. But I thought it was fantastic. I was a little trepidatious about the fact that Tang was going to be in it. I was like, is this a bit of stunt casting? But no, that's what the character is. The character is a Chinese immigrant who's fumbling her way through, but is she? And is she representative of so much more? So I thought it was great. I thought it was brilliant. And it's one of my favorite films of the year, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to talk about it today. So I'm giving it 5. I'm giving it
the full 5. Wow,
5 broken monogrammed cell phones out of 5.
Fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it for many of the reasons you just described. I loved being introduced to this director and Korean cinema. I just love the visual eye candy of this film, and as a secondary note, I just love the beauty of Korea. Sometimes you see films about Korea, or I see things about Korea, you just see Seoul and it's lots of people. It's like we get it in Hong Kong sometimes. Whenever you see a documentary or some travel thing about Hong Kong, you always see just masses of people, concrete, and skyscrapers. And you forget that Hong Kong is 50% country park. I was bowled over by how beautiful Korea was, and some of these different outdoor shots, and thinking, wow, this is a beautiful country as well. So I guess that's just a secondary consideration. Like I said, I'm jealous that you had a second viewing of this. I think some of the kinks that I still have in my mind would have been kind of worked out if I'd gotten to watch this again. So I didn't like it quite as much as you did, but I thoroughly enjoyed it and highly recommend. I'm going to give it a full 4 broken monogrammed cell phones out of 5. I'm looking forward to watching more films by Park Chan-wook.
Yeah, and I will recommend some to you. They're great. I think it's safe to say he hasn't really put a foot wrong yet. Some are better than others, but they're all good. Yeah. So I'll recommend some too. But yeah, I'm so glad you liked it. I'm so glad it's as good as I hoped it was gonna be. I don't think it's getting a release in the US and the UK till about October, actually, which just seems so cruel. For anybody itching to see it, and there will be many. You know, Park Chan-wook, rightly so, has a rabid fan base, and this I think although this is something very different for him, I think we've seen him explore different genres now in the last few movies that he's given us, and people will not be disappointed.
Right. Fantastic. Well, that's James and I's review of Park Chan-wook's Decision to Leave. What do you think about the film? Have you had a chance to see it? Love to know what your thoughts and perspectives are. You'd be welcome to drop that in the comment boxes below. Also, James and I are on social media. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram, and the links to where you can follow us and how to do that will be in the description below. James?
That's right. You know, help me, help Steve explore Korean cinema. Do you agree with me that 2003 was just like the best year ever for Korean cinema? There were so many good films. Let us know some of your favorite Korean movies from the last 2 decades. And you never know, we may end up doing a whole deep dive season on Korean cinema.
Sounds good to me. Until next episode, bye-bye.
Goodbye.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.